Laid up after an injury, I asked my husband for help. He said, "You're useless like this." I smiled and said, "Guess I'll learn to be alone then." Now he's the one begging. Hi Reddit. This has been building for a while, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened. I'm 27, and I've been married to my husband, Nico, for almost 4 years. We've had a pretty good relationship, nothing perfect, of course, but we made it work. Or, at least, I thought we did. A month ago, I hurt my ankle pretty badly. It wasn't anything too dramatic, just a bad sprain, but it left me pretty much immobile for a while. I was laid up with crutches, trying to figure out how I could get through the next couple of weeks without completely losing my mind. I work a full-time job in marketing, and Nico's a freelance graphic designer, so we both have our hands full. But in the back of my mind, I thought, okay, this will be tough, but Nico and I can handle it. We've dealt with worse. But I was wrong. I don't know what I was expecting, but Nico's reaction caught me completely off guard. I've always been the independent one, the person who handles things on my own. I hate asking for help, and Nico knows this about me. He's always been a bit more relaxed, I guess you could say. He's good at taking care of himself, but doesn't always think about what others might need. That's never been a huge problem for us. We've always figured it out. That first night after the injury, I was just trying to get comfortable on the couch. My foot was propped up, ice pack on it, and I was hoping to just zone out with some TV. It was the first time I really felt like I needed help. Nothing major, just a glass of water, maybe a blanket. I tried to keep it low-key. I called out to Nico, who was in the other room working on one of his projects. "Hey, could you get me a glass of water?" I asked, trying not to sound too needy. He came into the living room, looked at me with this look I can only describe as annoyance, and said, "You're useless like this. I really don't know what you want from me." The words hit me like a ton of bricks, and for a second, I didn't even know how to respond. I had never heard him speak to me like that before. He wasn't angry exactly, just frustrated in a way I couldn't understand. But I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe I was overthinking it, I thought. Maybe he was just tired. I gave a small, quiet laugh and said, "Guess I'll learn to be alone then." I didn't think much of it at the time, but I remember the way he just stared at me, like I had said something he didn't quite understand. From that point on, it felt like things started shifting. It wasn't just the occasional comment or offhand remark anymore. It was constant. Every time I asked for help, whether it was to bring me a pillow or just reach something on a shelf, there was this underlying resentment in his voice. He'd huff, roll his eyes, or mutter under his breath about how I should just be more careful, or why do I always end up getting hurt? I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt at first. He's a freelancer, which means his work hours are unpredictable, and I know how stressful it can be to juggle projects. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about the injury. There was something else going on, something deeper. Maybe he didn't like seeing me in a vulnerable position. Maybe he didn't like that I couldn't take care of myself the way I always had. It got worse every day. Nico would come home from work, exhausted. I get it, but he didn't even ask me how I was doing. Instead, he'd complain about his day, complain about the things he had to do, and complain about the work I wasn't able to do because I was laid up. He never once offered to cook dinner, even though I could barely stand up long enough to make a sandwich. The idea of him helping me, actually helping me, seemed completely out of the question to him. One evening, I asked if he could help me out by picking up some groceries on his way home. We were running low on essentials, and I really didn't want to drag myself to the store. I thought it was a reasonable request, especially since it wasn't like I was asking him to do everything. Just a small favor. His response? "I'm not your personal shopper, you know. It's not my fault you can't even walk." It stung. Badly. But I didn't react right away. Instead, I just nodded and said, "All right, I'll figure it out myself." I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me upset, but I was deeply hurt. The more I tried to push him, the more he pulled away. The more I needed help, the more he made it clear that I was just an inconvenience to him. He stopped asking if I needed anything, stopped offering to help with the housework, Stopped doing anything that resembled empathy or kindness. I started to feel like I was invisible, like my injury wasn't even a big deal to him. But here's where I decided to stop waiting for him to change. I could have stayed angry. I could have let the bitterness consume me, but instead, I decided to do something different. I stopped asking for help altogether. I figured, if he didn't want to help me, then I would have to figure things out on my own. The next day, I managed to drag myself to the kitchen on my crutches and made myself breakfast. I started cooking dinner with one hand, hopping around like an idiot. I started doing things I never thought I could do with one good leg and one broken one. And in a weird way, it made me feel stronger. But here's the twist. Nico noticed. At first, he made a few offhand comments, but after a while, he started to get frustrated. Every time I did something on my own, he would either give me a weird look or comment on how dramatic I was being. And when I didn't immediately break down in tears or ask him for help, I think it started to sink in that I wasn't going to beg him. I wasn't going to beg him for anything anymore. A few days ago, he walked in and saw me struggling to lift a heavy box of books from the shelf. He stood there, watching for a second before finally saying, "Can I help you with that?" I didn't look up at him. I just smiled a little and said, "Guess I'll learn to be alone then." The expression on his face was a mix of confusion and guilt. I didn't give him a chance to respond. I just carried on with what I was doing. The whole thing has been building up, and Nico has been acting increasingly odd. The guilt is obvious, but there's also this weird tension between us. And that's when his sister, Maddie, called me. I never expected it to go where it did, but that call set everything in motion. Maddie called me late in the afternoon, right when I was trying to get some work done. It was the first time she'd reached out since the whole injury thing happened, so I was a little surprised. Nico and his sister had a bit of a complicated relationship. She's the more loud and proud type, and Nico can be, well, let's say, less than supportive of her choices in life. But she's always been friendly enough to me, and I figured she might just want to check in. When I answered, she wasted no time. "Hey, how are you doing?" she asked, but her voice had that kind of tone that made it clear she was trying to be more than just polite. "Nico's been acting really weird lately." I didn't know what to say at first, but I couldn't hide the exhaustion in my voice. "I'm getting by. He's not been very helpful, honestly." Maddie hesitated for a moment. "I thought as much," she said softly, like she was choosing her words carefully. "Listen, I don't know if Nico's been talking to you about it, but he's been going off on you to everyone lately. And I'm not talking about just his friends. He's been telling his parents, his coworkers, me, that you're being too needy, that you're acting like you can't take care of yourself, like it's some huge burden on him. It's really starting to bother me." I felt my stomach drop. Of course, Nico hadn't said anything to me about talking to anyone else, but it didn't exactly surprise me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much he was twisting things in his head. I'd asked for help a few times, yes, but it wasn't like I was constantly nagging him. I was just trying to get through each day. But from the way he was telling people, it sounded like I was parasitic. Maddie continued, her voice lowering. "I know Nico can be a little selfish sometimes, but I've never heard him talk about you like this. It's making me question things, honestly." I didn't know how to respond. There was so much to unpack, but I felt like I was starting to see Nico for who he really was. The facade that he'd been hiding behind for so long was cracking, and Maddie's words were like little cracks in the wall, letting in a little more light. I didn't want to let her know just how deep it had gone, how I had felt ignored, unimportant, and abandoned by him, but something about the way she said it made me want to spill everything. So, I did. "I think the thing that's hurting the most is that he's acting like I am the problem here," I told her, my voice thick. "It's like he's punishing me for being hurt. Every time I ask for help, he just rolls his eyes or makes some snarky comment. I don't know when he turned into someone who couldn't see me as a person anymore. I used to be independent. I used to do everything myself, but now it's like I'm nothing to him. And he's treating me like I'm just in the way." Maddie didn't respond right away. I could hear her sigh, like she was processing what I was saying. Then, after a pause, she spoke again, her voice laced with concern. "You need to set some boundaries with him, or it's going to get worse." He's never had to really care for anyone but himself. You know that, right? He's always been the type who does things when he wants to do them, not when anyone else needs them done. And I think right now he's scared. He's scared because you're showing him that you don't need him, and that's throwing him off. If you keep letting him get away with treating you like this, it'll only get worse. And you deserve better than that. I swallowed hard. She was right. I knew she was. Deep down, I had been waiting for Nico to come around, to recognize how hurtful his behavior was and apologize. But I'd been putting off the inevitable. He wasn't going to change unless I made him see what he was doing. I had no idea where to go from here. I didn't want to make a huge scene, but something had to give. As much as I loved Nico, I was starting to realize that love wasn't enough. Not if it was built on these layers of disrespect and neglect. That night, Nico came home later than usual. He'd been at a client meeting, working late on a project that had nothing to do with us. I wasn't expecting anything to change, but when he walked in, I could tell he was trying to make up for the distance he'd put between us. He started with the usual. "Hey, I got you something from the store," he said, holding up a bag from a bakery I liked. I thought for a moment that maybe he was going to act differently. But then I noticed the tension in his voice, the way his shoulders were stiff as he set the bag down. "Hope you're not still mad at me." I didn't look up. Instead, I kept my eyes on the TV screen. "I'm not mad, Nico. I'm just tired." There was a long silence. I could feel his eyes on me, like he was waiting for me to break the silence. But I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to be the one to fix this. Not anymore. Finally, he spoke again, but this time, his words were more pointed, more venomous than usual. "I don't know what you expect from me," he said, his voice low. "I'm not a nurse. I didn't sign up to take care of you. You're fine. You're just being dramatic. I'm not going to spend my life catering to you because you can't walk for a couple of weeks." That hit me harder than any of the other things he'd said. It wasn't just that he was being cruel, it was the fact that he didn't even seem to care anymore. There was no empathy, no understanding, just bitterness. And that was the moment I knew. Nico had crossed a line. I looked at him then, for the first time really looking, and said something that surprised even me. "Guess I'll learn to be alone then." The shock on his face was instant. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. I stood up, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through my ankle, and limped out of the room. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of explaining myself. He had already made his stance clear. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own emotions. I wasn't going to beg him. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into thinking I was the problem. If he couldn't see me as an equal, as a partner, then maybe it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The days after that night were strange. Nico was quieter than usual, but not in a reflective way, more like a dog that had been scolded but wasn't quite sure what to do with the scolding. He still went about his routine, but there was an obvious tension in the house. It wasn't just that I wasn't asking for help anymore. It was as if he was trying to justify his behavior to himself. I could hear him muttering under his breath, probably to convince himself that I was the one in the wrong. But I wasn't going to be dragged into that cycle again. I'd always been good at keeping my cool, but this time, something felt different. Something had shifted inside me. I had spent years trying to be the supportive wife, the one who took care of everything, the one who held the house together when everything else was falling apart. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Somewhere along the way, I allowed Nico to treat me like I was an afterthought. And I wasn't going to let it go without doing something about it. At first, it wasn't about revenge, at least, not in the way you might think. It was about reclaiming control. I realized that if I didn't make him face the consequences of his actions, he'd never understand how deep the hurt ran. So I started small. One evening, after a particularly cold interaction between us, I decided to do something that would drive the point home. I didn't tell Nico what I was doing. I didn't make a scene. I simply stopped doing the little things. The little things that, over time, had become a routine between us. Things like washing his favorite mug, making his coffee in the morning, or leaving a note in his bag reminding him about a deadline. For the first time, I just didn't do it. It wasn't that I wanted to make him miserable. I just wanted him to notice. to see how much I had been doing for him, how much I had been carrying without any appreciation. The next morning, I heard Nico grumble when he couldn't find his coffee mug, then curse under his breath when his clothes weren't folded neatly. He didn't say anything directly to me, but I could hear him pacing around the house, growing more and more frustrated. I didn't respond. I just let it play out. By the third day of this, he finally broke. I was sitting on the couch, working on some emails, when I heard him enter the room. His footsteps were heavy, like he was carrying something on his shoulders. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, just staring at me. I could feel the tension building up, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight. "What's your problem? Why are you acting like this? You've been ignoring everything, and I don't even know why." I didn't look up from my laptop. Instead, I calmly responded, "I'm not ignoring anything. I'm just letting you handle things for a change." That shut him up. He blinked, clearly taken aback. "What do you mean?" I could feel my heart racing, but I forced myself to remain steady. "You've been acting like I'm a burden, like I'm asking for too much. So I decided to see how it feels. You know, to not be the one holding everything together." There was a long pause. I could see him searching for words, but all he could manage was a frustrated sigh. I glanced up at him, finally meeting his eyes. I could see the confusion in his expression, the helplessness. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to me standing my ground. "You're being ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just don't get why you're making everything harder than it needs to be." I closed my laptop, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "I didn't make things harder. You did. And I think it's time you realize that." I stood up then, slowly, deliberately. "I've been carrying this relationship for a long time, Nico. I've been taking care of everything, making sure you're comfortable, doing everything you need. But you're so wrapped up in yourself that you never saw it. I'm not going to beg you to be a decent partner. I'm not going to ask for help anymore. Not because I don't need it, but because you've shown me that I don't matter enough for you to even try." His face went pale, his eyes narrowing. I could tell he was trying to hold it together, trying to avoid any kind of confrontation. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. "I'm not going to sit around waiting for you to change," I said, my voice steady. "You've already shown me who you are, and I don't think I can live with that anymore." The silence between us was deafening. Nico opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. I just turned and walked out of the room. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Over the next few days, things started to shift. Nico's behavior became even more erratic. He was trying, in his own way, to get back to how things were before, doing things around the house, offering help, though it felt more like an obligation than a genuine offer. But it was too little, too late. I could see right through it. He wasn't trying to change. He was trying to salvage his own guilt, to make himself feel better about how he had treated me. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw the real consequences of what I had done. I had planned a quiet evening, just me, some takeout, and a movie. I wasn't expecting anything from Nico. I had learned by now that if I expected something from him, I'd only be disappointed. But when I got home that night, I found him sitting on the couch, looking like he was waiting for a confrontation. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went to the kitchen to grab a drink, all the while knowing exactly what he was about to say. I could feel the weight of it before he even spoke. "I know I've messed up," he started, his voice cracking a little. "But I don't want to lose you. I've been thinking about everything I've done, and I don't know how to make it right." I took a long breath, standing in the doorway. "I'm not looking for an apology, Nico. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I need you to see me. For the first time in a long time, I need you to really see how much I've been doing, how much I've been giving, and how little you've ever cared. I'm not your servant. I'm your partner. If you can't understand that, then this is over." I didn't wait for him to respond. I simply turned and walked away. The week after I walked away from Nico's apology, things started to fall apart in a way I never expected. Nico was trying harder, too hard, if you ask me. It was like he had this frantic energy around him, like he thought if he just acted normal again, everything would magically go back to how it used to be. But I wasn't buying it. I had already seen the real Nico, and the nice gestures, the overcompensating acts, were just a way to patch up the guilt he felt. He wasn't trying to change, he was trying to fix the hole in his image. One evening, about 5 days after our conversation, Nico showed up at the door with a bunch of flowers, a sorry-looking attempt at the kind of gesture that usually worked in movies. I stood in the doorway, not even surprised. He stood there, waiting for me to react, like the flowers were supposed to make everything okay. "Can we talk?" he asked, and there was that same tone, the one that made my skin crawl. It wasn't genuine. It was pleading. "I know I've messed up, but I want to fix this. I want to prove to you that I can be better." I couldn't do it anymore. I wasn't going to be the one to hold his hand and tell him it was all going to be fine. I wasn't going to be the one to make excuses for him or play the role of the martyr. I had given him the chance. I had waited long enough for him to come around. "No," I said flatly. "You can't fix this. I'm not interested in being fixed. I'm interested in being seen. For once in my life, I want someone to realize that I'm more than just a caretaker, more than just someone who holds everything together. And you couldn't do that, Nico. You couldn't even try." His eyes flashed with frustration, but I didn't flinch. I was done. I had been holding back for so long, trying to be patient with him, trying to make him see the truth of our relationship. But the reality was clear now. Nico wasn't capable of the kind of self-awareness it took to make this right. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice almost a whisper, but there was no emotion behind it, just the hollow sound of a man trying to salvage his pride. "I thought you'd just forgive me, like you always do." I shook my head. "You can't just expect me to forgive you every time you mess up. You can't keep treating me like I'm someone who exists to fix things for you. That's not love, Nico. That's convenience." He didn't respond. He didn't even try to argue. I could see the gears in his head turning, trying to think of something to say, some way to make it seem like this was all my fault. But he couldn't find the words. For the first time, I saw him for who he really was, someone who didn't want to take responsibility, someone who would rather manipulate the situation to fit his narrative than own up to his mistakes. I stepped back, shutting the door gently in his face. That was it. That was the moment. I knew I was done. I spent the following weeks focusing on myself, rediscovering things that had been buried under the weight of the relationship. I'd forgotten what it was like to wake up and not feel the weight of someone else's expectations. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe without worrying about what Nico thought, without wondering if he was mad at me for needing help. A few months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a rhythm without Nico. It wasn't easy at first, but the weight of that relationship started to lift, and I found myself rediscovering the parts of me that I had neglected for too long. I started doing things for myself again, going on walks, reading books I hadn't had the time to read, spending time with friends I had ignored for far too long. I'd healed more than I thought possible in such a short time. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was with Nico, and I liked the new me stronger, more independent, and sure of what I deserved. As for Nico, he tried to reach out a few times after that last conversation, but I didn't respond. I couldn't keep pretending that the man I married was the same one who had let me down time and time again. Eventually, he stopped calling. His apologies, his attempts to fix everything, were nothing more than the last gasps of someone who realized he'd lost the only person who ever really cared for him. I didn't need Nico anymore. And that realization? That was my final act of revenge. I had been invisible in that relationship for too long, but now, I was the one who was in control. Nico had to face the fact that he had lost everything, not because of anything I had done, but because of how he treated me. And now, for the first time, I could finally say I was free. That was the last time I ever heard from Nico, and it was exactly how I wanted it to end.